Old people.
You went to D&D Con?
Oh my God! What? Who told us we have a show tonight?
That was a little faster than I thought.
What did you? Aren't you in control of that though? Don't you?
Yeah, but it usually has a delay. Hey, everybody! How's it going, Amber? How's it going, Jedi Council? Hashtag SPSM is in the house on hashtag WSPD17 or World Suicide Prevention Day 17. And we're excited to be here because we are going to be talking about Dungeons and Dragons, which I know is going to make the Jedi Council excited. Tweet us your excitement, Jedi Council. So we are, because we probably spent the last 20 minutes trying to find an old archived article about the link, the research into the supposed link between Dungeons and Dragons and suicide, which we think.
Wait, April, when you say
From
we, you mean me. It wasn't we. There was no we in it.
Tony Statlord and Waldorf's the thing.
From 1989. Like, oh, fresh off the presses.
We're excited that you're here, and we've done a little bit of a thing today. So it's World Suicide Prevention Day. So all across Twitter and Facebook, people have been tweeting amazing inspirational messages, wonderful content about how to reach out for help, about warning signs to look for, about why people are still alive. We have suicide attempt survivors talking about surviving their suicide attempt and what the meaning they think is behind that. It's been amazing to go through. I want to say, we first started the chat in what was it, 2013. This is now our 5th season. And the first couple of years, when it came to Suicide Prevention Month, World Suicide Prevention Day, National Suicide Prevention Week, one of the things on SPSM that we talked about was the need to use social media. And here we are, just a couple of years later, people are really, are sort of crystallizing into a couple of different hashtags. They're using social media to share messages. We have celebrities who are like Logic, who are using their ability to do great media that people connect with to share messages about how to get help. We really seen this sort of tipping point of engagement. So we're going to be talking about a different kind of engagement with social media and suicide, and we're going to be talking about, I don't know, is seedier a word, more sensationalistic? I don't know what the right word is. We'll check in with the peanut gallery below. Like, what would you call, when we talk about Blue Whale and Dungeons and Dragons and sort of sensationalized links between popular culture and suicide? What do you guys think? How do we?
Urban legends.
Urban legends.
Is as possible, is as close as we get today, but it's just made up stuff. It's fun to believe.
It's certainly interesting, and I was surprised about how much stuff I could find about that, like the Disneyland suicides and things like that. So when I started looking around for social media related urban legends about suicide, I was surprised that given that social media really hasn't been around that long, there was just so much salacious content. It was just sort of I think Desiree Sage calls it suicide porn. There was just so much of it out there. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, sort of the less responsible side of messaging about suicide. And I have watched some truly creepy things in preparation for tonight. If you don't know who I am, I'm at Doc Foreman. Now you're different. And I have some wonderful co-hosts below. Tony Wood, say hi to the people.
Hey everybody, I'm Tony Wood at ADWWW on Twitter, and I'm also the chair of the board of the American Association of Suicidology. Suicidology.org. Check out that microsite. It's brand new. It's hot. It's a microsite for suicide prevention.
What is a microsite?
I'm not sure what a microsite is. It's a site that Michael made for Suicide Prevention Week. Is that true, Chris? Chris Maxwell, everybody?
Who's Michael?
I don't know. Isn't that what you just said, April?
A microsite.
Oh, a micro. That's different.
Micro machines. We only talk about micro machines.
I love micro machines. Sorry.
Were they the ones that had a penny in the back of them?
I don't think so. No, but remember the Micro Machine Man?
No.
I was into him.
I don't. A Micro Machine.
No.
Yeah.
Everybody, Tony Wood.
I threw it over to Chris, and he just muted himself again. That's fine.
Hey, everybody.
Chris Maxwell, introduce yourself.
Hey, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. Well, I don't want to oversell it. I'm really happy to be here tonight, and incredibly interested to talk about this this topic. I'm Chris Maxwell. I'm coordinator of member engagement for the largest national suicide prevention hotline in the country. I'm also a co-chair of the strategic planning, I've got strategic planning on my mind. Strategic task force for media response for the American Association of Suicidology. So obviously this is something that we've had to deal with, at least so far, in terms of urban legends and how things are being perceived in the general population. And so we have to find ways to effectively communicate to everybody about what we should be talking about.
And I'm excited because the reason that this is a show that I had been wanting to do for several months because of events that had transpired related to Chris's committee work with AAS. And Dr. Bart Andrews.
Good evening, everybody. It is an amazing time to be alive and involved with suicide prevention and social media, because what is today, everybody? Oh my God, it's World Suicide Prevention Day. Have I got that right?
I know. We're supposed to be lighting a candle at 8 p.m., but I don't know who's 8 p.m.
First of all, candles cause fires and fires kill people. Is that really the best way to?
I've had a candle going all day.
And how many
also
people
air
die?
pollution.
Fossil fuel, yeah, carbon contributing to.
My lawyers advised me not to speak of this.
Yeah, well, I think that's smart. Having good attorneys has kept me out of prison over the years, and I think that there's something to be said for that. So I'm excited to be here. I love this topic because I think there is a lot connected into this. I want to give some shout outs because of those of the Tom Cruise, one of an SPSM member from way back.
Hey, drive.
Is like, I don't know, like boarded up and bound in somewhere in the Tampa area, I think. Tom, we're thinking about you. We love you and the family. Please stay safe and dry. I don't ever want to have to go through a hurricane, to be quite honest. Not interested. Anybody? I've got no. Oh, I've actually went through a tropical storm in New York. You've lived through. I've
social media through a hurricane.
You do, but you do. In live shooting events, you've been in active shooter events and continue to use social media. Yeah, that's right. Maybe I wasn't supposed to say that. Anyway, because that would be responsible with it. Anyway, I think the blue whale is something that hit my my Twitter feed. I want to say it's been less than a year, like 6 months, 7 months. And it has a lot of aspects to it that are urban legendy. It's not made from whole cloth, right? So it's not one of these urban legends that's just completely disconnected from anything. There's actually some real events behind some of it. And I want to get into this because I did some research about this, and there's some really compelling things about why we even have urban legends, why these things happen and grow and become such a part of the fabric of our daily lives.
And thank you for that wonderful segue, Bart. So I remember my very first urban legend. I was 6 years old, and the 8-year-old neighbor girl tells me an urban legend about dead people rising out of the graves and scraping on your windows to come and get you. And I never slept well again in that house. Like, urban legends are these spooky stories that like sort of sound true. I remember urban legends about, somebody like drops a bunch of LSD in the pool and there's a kid in the pool and then he thinks he's a glass of orange juice or whatever. Like, I've heard all the, people tell these stories about Chris Maxwell. When you're a kid, people tell these stories. And so, of course, a few months ago, as we're working on developing a media response committee for AAS, the blue whale game hits the mainstream media. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Maybe. Yeah. So, yeah, it kind of came out of nowhere, I think, for a lot of us, which was a little bit terrifying, but also a little bit.
Can you go back? You're frozen up. I'm so sorry. Go back a little bit.
Okay. No, all I said was that it kind of caught us all off guard. It wasn't something that we saw coming, and then all of a sudden we just start hearing Blue Whale Challenge, and it kind of seeps into the into what we are doing, right? And we're seeing this kind of pop up in hashtags. We're seeing people refer to it, and then we see little things, little stories here and there in the media. And at least that was my experience. But when you start asking other suicide prevention people in this field, they don't know what's going on. They haven't heard of it, or they really haven't put enough attention to it to try to figure out a response. And so for a while there, we had a lot of people asking questions, and we weren't prepared. So that was a little bit terrifying, and I know that's not the first time that that's happened in this field.
So
Sure.
by not prepared, I'm going to claim a case of old lady, which is that once there is probably a piece of this that once you get to a certain age, especially if you're in academe, there was this period in my social media use where I figured out what Snopes was, right? And so when people would post things on Facebook that seemed kind of a little bit like, you know, a little salacious and urban legendy, like, you know, you do a little bit of investigation, but there is something about certain kinds of urban legends that there may be a kernel of truth in them. People are still concerned. And I will say, like, we've been asked about Blue Whale Challenge at conferences, like when we're speaking at professional conferences, and about what is this going on and what are we doing to stop it, right? Who can explain
they're compellingly scary, and they're believable. The ones we're talking about are believable. The childlike teenagers and children have a tendency. There's another set of these that we are all aware of. They're like people rising from the grave and scratching on the windows, that are very dreamlike and very fairy tale-ish. Then as we sort of transition into adulthood, we have these adult urban legends about, you know, children. The famous one about Pop Rocks and soda being lethal.
I remember that.
That's fun. That's still around.
When I was a kid, Tony, do you remember the Kiss and Sean Cassidy urban myth? So that was a big urban myth.
Oh, that Sean Cassidy was in Kiss because of the makeup.
No. That Kiss and Sean Cassidy. Kiss hated Sean Cassidy, and they shaved his head and tarred and feathered him. That was the big urban myth. This was when I was in 4th grade. I still remember this, right? Because either you were a big Sean Cassidy fan, and probably there was a gender variable about whether you like Sean Cassidy or not, or admitted you like Sean Cassidy or not, or you were a Kiss fan, and that Kiss was the iron fist of truth to Sean Cassidy's bubblegum pop crap. But apparently it turns out that Kiss never assaulted Sean Cassidy. It didn't happen to the detriment of all.
Which is really a shame. And because of Sean Cassidy's success, it paved the way for Justin Bieber.
And this didn't go far afield at all. Can somebody explain what the Blue Whale game is, or the Blue Whale Challenge is, for those who don't know? Although a lot of people are saying, like, there are people on the thing saying we're getting asked about this, and Jedi Council is, you know, being asked about this, for example. Can someone explain to everyone what that's about?
Glad to. So in theory, there's a guy in Russia. Did you guys know this? There's a guy in Russia that actually this is fact. There's a guy in Russia that's been arrested. And he was apparently online and extolling people, encouraging people, and trying to coerce people to kill themselves via some social media platform that I don't really quite understand, other than he was on social media and was recruiting and trying to influence other folks to kill themselves. The challenge is a 50-day challenge, I do believe.
Or 50 task challenge.
50 tasks. And the tasks are around things like self-injury, doing dangerous things, doing odd things like going to a bridge, cutting on yourself. Some of it doesn't make a lot of sense. Some of it is connected to suicide. And the final event is supposed to be your death. So it's 50 tasks with the culminating event supposed to be your death, and it's called Blue Whale because of the myth that whales beach themselves as a way to kill themselves. That in fact beach whales are attempting suicide, which we actually kind of know that actually whales actually beach themselves for a lot of different reasons, none of which probably have anything to do with suicide. And so that's this 50 task, maybe a task a day. And that there's people, and there's this other sense of the game. If you read through a lot of the different articles, that there's these mysterious other folks on the other end of your social media that are extolling you and encouraging you and kind of giving you, that are assigning you these tasks. So there's
and you talk to other people playing the game, like eventually in person, like some of the tasks are meeting up with people who are doing it too.
Yes, so there's not only this game, and some of the articles say that there's an actual app that you actually download a game, right? That there's some blue whale game or app that you're actually
downloading. And there's even like encrypted tasks, like some of the tasks appear to be puzzles or encrypted or things like that.
So, and these key elements we'll talk about, because some of the research about why urban legends take off and why this one has legs to it and people remember it, we'll actually talk about something called, are you guys familiar with this? Counterintuitive, minimally counterintuitive biases. That are things that I know, minimally counterintuitive biases, and the role they play in the spread of urban legends. We'll don't let me forget that, because that's good stuff.
Well, keep going. I want to hear about minimally.
Yeah. So when this is really interesting. This is fascinating stuff, right? There's one of the reasons that urban legends are so popular is that we are evolutionarily driven to attend to stories that could either save our lives or the lives of other people, right? Or help us procreate. So we like stories that help us avoid death, protect the people from death, or help us be successful with procreation. And so, yes, I know that's the theme. So here's the other. So here's the really interesting. So if you look at the most popular urban legends are things where, for instance, that you could, if you don't do this, for instance, by the way, if you don't sit in front of a mirror and say a Bloody Mary 3 times, you're pretty much guaranteed not to summon Bloody Mary into your life, right? So
that did not work, and I tried it.
But don't do kids if you're
did
at home.
Did you do stiff as a feather, light as a balloon?
Who here did it? I've done it. I've done it. We've all done it. We're all here. So we discarded the advice and actually tried to summon Bloody Mary, which says a lot about, I think, modern day culture. So they find that the things that people get really attracted to in the stories that get legs are stories that, in fact, people can use to avoid harm or help other people avoid harm, which gets to another factor. Not only are we compelled to attend and remember these stories better, we're more likely to tell these stories. And here's a really interesting fact. People who tell stories that have a threat factor in them, by the way, don't press these 2 keys on your keyboard at the same time, it'll erase all your data, are seen as more competent, right? And so when people tell stories and in their story they work in a risk avoidance factor, by the way, this is really dangerous, don't do this, they get rated as being much more competent. So what you have is we're evolutionarily, and this is for those of us that know what it's like in the suicide prevention community, you can probably see why urban myths like this are pretty attractive, because it's compelling. People are trying to prevent suicide and they want to be seen as competent. And one of the quickest ways to meet all these needs is to get involved in things like saying, God, if people talk about suicide in a certain way, people are going to kill themselves. Or if you get online and you run into this, that people are going to kill themselves, or Dungeons and Dragons might kill you, right?
Yeah. Now, when we were preparing for this show, one of the things that I did was I went and I was
preparing. Okay, sorry.
Some of it did preparation.
So I was looking at other suicide-related urban legends because I had remembered growing up about people, really saying that Dungeons and Dragons would make you kill yourself.
Doesn't matter.
What?
Nothing.
What were you saying, Tony?
Nothing.
You're frozen up.
It was a great bit.
Did you need to do the bit, Tony?
No, the bit's over.
So one of the things that we were one of the things that I found was I did actually manage to find an online article about, talking about how at one point people really believed or were concerned about the link between Dungeons and Dragons and youth suicide. And they remember these urban legends, have sometimes a nugget or a seed of truth around them. And the blue whale one does too. It's Joiner's acquired capability all over the place, right? But with Dungeons and Dragons, there was a young man in the early days of this game. He had very complex mental health issues. He does eventually die by suicide. And for a while, the conversation was that the Dungeons and Dragons caused his suicide. And we know that there's right now the big thing that's going to cause everyone's suicide is bullying, right? There's this like really simplistic public narrative. And so at that time it was Dungeons and Dragons, it's a cult game and it will cause suicide. And then I found this article that had this weird reference that the American Association of Suicidology had explored whether or not there was a causal link between D&D and suicide. And then, my friend, they got my attention, and then we went down the rabbit hole. Chris, tell us a little bit about what you guys looked for when you were trying to figure that one out.
Well, we trying to figure out the Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, like where was like that article? We were like looking all over for it.
So there was a resurgence of coverage back in 2016. Both the BBC and the New York Times did a cover story kind of reliving. There was a whole group. Apparently, there was a group called like Bad. Or something like that. There was this mom who had a son who died of suicide, who also played Dungeons and Dragons, who got really worked up and blamed Dungeons and Dragons for the suicide. And so there's this whole organization, and they were connected to the Christian right groups and that sort of thing, because Dungeons and Dragons promoted demonology and witchcraft and all this stuff. And this was particularly post-Reagan, post-Jimmy Carter, when the religious right had really started, this resurgence of religious activism was in full gear. It's also when the censorship stuff really started. So they were out there trying to make these connections between Dungeons and Dragons and suicide. And of course, it turns out that, in fact, there were people who played Dungeons and Dragons who also died of suicide. Yes, there is no... Yes.
People who die by suicide are kind of just like other people.
It turns out that people that die by suicide also drive motorcycles, drink alcohol, go to sporting events, live in houses, live in apartments, drink milk,
underwear,
date girls,
Terrifying.
date boys, wear underwear, don't wear underwear. All these things are true, and none of them are in any way predictive of suicide. So apparently, this is the interesting. Apparently, the American Association of Suicidology studied the connection between Dungeons and Dragons and suicide and found no relationship between Dungeons and Dragons and suicide. I would actually say that Dungeons and Dragons and suicide is probably protective, because I was involved with Dungeons and Dragons for years, and we were an extremely tight-knit group. We talked to each other nonstop about everything, including Dungeons and Dragons. We were around each other nonstop. We were very close. And for those of you who've played role-playing games before, you get very, very connected with that group. It's a very intimate experience. So I would tend to believe that it's actually more protective than anything else. But here's this thing where, and it makes sense. Look, a family member who has experienced a suicide in their life, it is such an inexplicable event for them. It creates so many unknowns. If you can find something simple and clear to hang on to about why this happened to you and to your loved one, it solves a lot of emotional problems, right? And that's why we see a lot of this stuff. You saw it recently. Maybe it was Chris Cornell's wife who instantly came out and said, well, maybe it was these medications he was taking that made him kill himself. And maybe medication is related. I don't begrudge her that. But we really want simple answers. And I think the thing that was really cool, and I know I'm monologuing here, but in the AAS response to Blue Whale, Julie Searle's comment was so powerful about we really can, simplifying causes to suicide is just not, it's not good suicidology. It's not a good way to understand what's happening. And that we can never tag suicide to any one event. And there's lots of reasons, and I can show you research that can show that clearly you can't tag suicide on one event. It just doesn't work that way. And it's particularly, I think, if we want to talk about dangerous, I think it's dangerous to tag suicide to things like media messaging, or to bullying, or to blue whale games. I think those, in fact, are incredibly dangerous things that are out in our environment that make it harder for us to actually do good suicide prevention work.
And this is really, really a good moment to pivot to Chris, because I want to talk about like what AAS did in terms of a press release for this. And Bart, you just really set it up perfectly. you know, when people are asking about these, there's this real temptation. Someone said, yeah, I think it was Kendra was tweeting, it's really hard. You want to learn more about what everyone's talking about, but you don't want to, you know, perpetuate a hoax, and you want to get good answers about that. And of course, I think in the era maybe before social media, I think you could just opt to not address things and they would sort of not get momentum. I think the problem is when things already have momentum, that's just not a strategy that works. And so, Chris, can you talk a little bit about when this came on the radar, why AS decided to do a press release and how you guys chose to handle it?
Yeah, so as part of the strategic media response task force, we had been talking about this for months and batting around the idea of actually putting out a release earlier or waiting. And I don't know what we were necessarily waiting for. Just I think we were kind of internally trying to decide whether or not that exact thing was going to be an issue, whether or not putting anything out was going to perpetuate something. The problem is that back early this summer, CNN and a couple of other major outlets started putting out stories about kids here in the States and had their deaths directly tied to this game. And, you know, directly tied to, they had found evidence on their social media activity that this was something that they had been searching out and things like that. So that it wasn't necessarily just something that was going to be with Russia or abstract of a concern. And so we said, okay, we've got an issue here. The major outlets are putting stuff out. Let's address this. It would have been probably better had we had had a release out before that, in all honesty. But the things that we really wanted to point out, I mean, basically the only way that we could address this and not perpetuate the myth aspect of it is to say that we have no evidence that this phenomenon exists. We don't know that this game is even real. And if you were going to report on it, which we can't tell you not to, right? But if you're going to report on it, we want to make sure that you understand that and that you understand the consequences of reporting things in a sensationalized way. So it was very much targeted at the media and trying to make sure that that they understood that, but also that anybody that feels like they wanted to look out for more, maybe don't look up the game itself, but maybe look into ways that they can speak with their kids about social media use and suicide. And so just trying to make it more of an effective conversation rather than like, oh, we don't like this, or, you know, this isn't a thing. So it was more of a, yeah.
No, that was excellent. And I thought that was just really strategic to say, you know, we really don't, you know, this blue whale challenge really is an urban legend. Are there possibly some deaths connected to it? Possibly not, in terms of how big of a public health issue is. You know, one of the things that I like to say is that people were dying by suicide before Dungeons and Dragons or before the blue whale challenge. And it's complicated, we don't understand it. But the good news is this is a great opportunity to talk with your kids. Like, have you heard what that is? You need to know that. Here's how, you know, how are you using your social media? What should you do if you or someone else is, you know, some things that are concerning you? Like that, like, here's a chance to have a conversation with youth. Here's a chance to remind people about what the actual sort of scope of the public health issue is. And I love that we didn't waste it. So if urban legends are good for one thing, they're good for getting people's attention. And if everybody's already looking over there, that's a great moment for us to be sharing information about good suicidology. And Bart, that I hope you noticed people tweeted that comment that you made several times, Bart, about oversimplifying the causes of suicide being bad suicidology. And like, that's a thing that we need to tell people. I think it's a wonderful thing to say. I wish that it was such a simple thing that it's just an app or a game, and if we put it into the game, then people won't die. But in fact, we don't understand it well, and we need to understand it better. The causes are complex. Here's what we know works. Here's what we need to know more about. Here's how to have a conversation with your kids. Those are things we can do, and I think that was fabulous. I was looking back through urban legends about suicide, and I found actually quite a lot of them, and quite a lot on social media. And I was sort of surprised. Bart, you're giving me funny Bart face.
Because those stories were creepy. I mean, I'd heard some of them. I couldn't believe how incredibly creepy and riveting those stories were. And some of the pictures, like the pictures that make you, those are some creepy pictures, right? I was like, oh my God, this is freaky cool.
And like, these are the kinds of things that, because they have that narrative, like Tony was talking about, like Chris was talking about, like you're talking about, Bart. So, one of them was the Disneyland suicides, where somebody dies by suicide on the It's a Small World After All ride. And that they escort people out of the ride, and then a family discovers a picture of somebody who has died, like on the end of a reel, and then there's what could very well be a photoshopped picture. The picture was a little fishy, and they're like, it's like on Imgur. Is it Imgur? Am I calling it wrong? There are other ones on YouTube where it's like, if you watch this video to the end, people who watch this video to the end go mad, and here are all the tales of the people who go mad and kill themselves after watching this creepy YouTube video, right? I found several versions of that. Is that like The Ring? I had a hard time.
Like The Ring. It's kind of like The Ring, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of interesting, because there's something about, because we don't understand suicide very well in many respects. There's something about it being this sort of spooky, mysterious sort of event, and it makes a good plot point in an urban legend, and I think that's why we see it.
I think the reason that urban legends are rife around suicide is for the exact reason you just stated. When you look at mythology and religion as an explanation of why things happen in the world, it has more traction when we don't understand why things happen in the world. Like we were all talking about it. Check out the dollop on Dr. Cotton and the germ theory of mental illness, right? When you don't understand what causes something, we come up with all kinds of explanations on why things happen. And we typically find really simplistic explanations for that, right? Because when we don't understand something that's scary, and think about it, what is more scary than suicide? It's something that people don't understand. To lose a loved one to suicide is probably one of the most damaging losses that anybody could ever experience, because of all of the unknowns around it and all of the social connections around it, what that means in terms of your social relationships and your sense of self. And so if we can have some easy explanations of why this is happening, it gives us a sense of control, right? If this thing, here's the thing you can avoid so that you never kill yourself, right? Don't look at this picture. Right? Or don't go to this website. Don't play this game. And so think about how attractive it is for parents who are worried about their kids being at risk of suicide, particularly with 13 Reasons Why out there, right? And all the hubbub around it. And it's interesting that the blue whale phenomenon kind of rode on the back of 13 Reasons Why. It was out there in February, but it didn't really start spiking until March, April, which was peak kind of 13 Reasons Why season, if I have my dates correct, and folks may correct me on that, and maybe I'm wrong.
It's not just 13 Reasons Why, but I mean, I don't know, but a few weeks ago, did you guys watch the sentencing of the young woman who was texting someone to kill himself, and he did die by suicide? I mean, there is a kernel of truth, the idea being that you could do something irresponsible and take someone who was vulnerable and coach them into some acquired capability, which is, I mean, we do know this young woman who did do that with a vulnerable young man, right?
But it wasn't gamified.
But there's another thing that I think what we see happening here is surrounding the morality of the person who's involved. A lot of the urban legends that I mean, like, have been around for a long time, they serve to communicate some sort of moral lesson. Like, this person did something wrong, and so she was killed in her car by the guy with the hook. It's a way to communicate a moral, and so the immorality of certain things and certain behaviors is what drives, I think, a lot of that the spread of a lot of these things. Unfortunately, because of how suicide is perceived in a lot of places, and to a lot of people, that morality portion is still a factor. And so I think that could be part of it here too.
Well, in all of horror genre, compromised morality is the chief cause of death.
That's right.
Yeah. Well,
Or
and I think
not knowing how to open a door correctly.
And stupidity, just overall stupidity. Oh,
And
someone
blondness.
can't greasy door handle. Oh.
Blondes do not make it out alive.
what?
Go ahead, Bart. Blondes don't make it out alive, man.
Oh, so the rules of
Morally compromised blondes.
morally compromised bonds.
Are there any other kind?
Well,
That's
I think
inappropriate.
I do think, but I think Chris's
Sorry,
point
blonde
about
people.
the morality of the issue really get. So we don't understand suicide. So what if we had some clear good guys and bad guys? Right? Doesn't that make things so much simpler for us? There are people out there, people playing Dungeons and Dragons or video games or movies or music. Or there's this game online where there are these really bad evil people that are trying to kill the people that you love. That really creates a dynamic that gives us a sense of control and allows us to quickly have a black and white, right? There are bad people out there. There are good people that are impacted by bad people. And if we can just locate these bad people, and if I can just alert my kids, stay away from this. Don't listen to rock music, because I don't know if you remember, but there was a big thing about Ozzy Osbourne causing an increase in the suicide rate, right? With the song "Suicide Solution."
What year was that?
That was Ozzy Osbourne's "Suicide Solution." I want to say that was late 70s, early 80s. A lot of this was,
81.
and a lot of this really did stem to the after the 60s and 70s, where religion was fading, its influence on American politics was fading. There was this huge backlash. And so a lot of the stuff that you see in the early 80s, Dungeons and Dragons, rock and roll, all that was a part of that religious backlash, right? There's clearly
the rise of the drug culture and the effects of crack cocaine in the inner city. Those were all things that we as a culture were not prepared for systematically. So those things were not handled well by the United States.
Yeah,
and so we had things to explain to each other, right? About
and I think just in that message, that crack cocaine was an urban city problem, when it was in fact just as widespread in suburban areas. But the only imagery that you got shown on TV every night was black people getting arrested, when in fact it was just as widespread in white communities. But that's not what the stuff the media was shoving down our throats every night. So these narratives get created that simplify this really, there's clearly good and there's clearly bad. And I think the Blue Whale Game challenge gets at that there, and particularly there's
someone preying on your kids. Like your kids
yes.
kill themselves, but a predator did it, right? Not there's illness that we don't understand as well as we need to.
Interesting that the story of public health is the story of the hidden devil and the demon in the house. If the further you reach back, the more fantastic the stories seem. But people believed all of these things, that bad air was the cause of all disease, and before we had germ theory, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Infection was caused by bathing,
yeah,
because you're rubbing off the protective coating on your skin. So you should only bathe. You should have face weekly, hands daily, feet never, or something like that.
I love Julie Cyril just tweeted talking about making a blue whale challenge, where it was step 1, paint a picture of a blue whale. Step 2, call 1-800-273-TALK. By the way, it's super cute. We had another tweeter, it's a youth mental health. It's the youth mental health action group, not talking about mental health and suicide in schools, making these, contributing to silence and shaming so the kids can gossip about these games. I will tell you, as we're preparing for this, they did suicide prevention moment in my daughter's middle school health class this week. Did I tell you guys what happened?
No.
So the suicide prevention was part of actually the bullying lecture. And they said, so what do you know about suicide? And my daughter Jane stands up and she's like, probably raises her hand, and she's like, my mom's a suicidologist. And they're like, nobody wants to talk to you. Bullying causes suicide. Don't do it. And then they went on to the next step. So,
well, I mean, the bullying causes suicide is out there. So, which is really concerning, because if bullying causes suicide, when you look at the data, the overwhelming majority of kids have been bullied. So we would expect the suicide rate among our youth to be somewhere around 70%.
Right.
But it's not. So maybe in fact, if you actually look at the data and make that means, you might come to the conclusion that the idea that bullying causes suicide turns out to be complete and utter bullshit. That doesn't mean that bullying isn't a contributing factor. It certainly can be, right?
That's the idea, that there's a predator, and then these predators hurt my child, and so my child, killed themselves. And the thing is, everything I know about what the public believes about suicide, I learned from my Uber drivers who tell me, and I probably 50% of all Uber drivers ask me about bullying and suicide once they find out that they're driving me to a suicide conference, right? So is it the cyberbullying? And we've done a really good job telling people bullying is bad, so much so that there's this weird public narrative, and these urban legends are kind of like that. They're these public narratives about the demon in the night that makes somebody kill themselves, right?
Well, they're so compelling, they're so exciting. Go ahead, Chris.
Going back to what Bart was saying about finding that simple excuse, that simple thing to blame, you want something easy to just pawn it off on. The problem is that that a lot of times it's obviously much more complicated, but I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how to say this sensitively. I don't know how many people actually want to accomplish something by prevention trainings. I have a sneaking suspicion.
Just a minute.
Whoa! Where are you going here, Chris Maxwell?
What'd you say?
I have a sneaking suspicion. God, you're cute when you sip your drink. That implementing some things may not be the priority, and especially implementing effective may certainly not be the priority. And it's all about how we control the narrative, right? This is specifically why we put the things in the release for AAS that we did, because we wanted to control the narrative in an effective way that was helpful to people and gave them something that they could then do and take from that. A lot of other places and other organizations chose to insist that the media not report on it, completely ignore it, erase it from the zeitgeist. That is impossible to do, and it is an unreasonable thing to ask. So I think on the other side of this, and then you obviously have the people who would just rather ignore it entirely because they don't want to actually implement any sort of effective thing to try to address it. Sorry, just a little rant, but that was kind of what I saw happen.
I totally, and I'm sort of having a DBT moment where yes, and if we understood better, how to predict when people are at risk, or things that were preventative that were way more sort of linear and easy and concrete to explain and control, I don't think we would have the same thing, right? When it's flu season at my kid's school, dude, they give flu shots in the public school now, and you can even get the little inhaler thing, and they can even bill Medicare, Medicaid, and they can, do all, and we talk about washing their hands, right? And we send Germ-X. They understand about germ theory at school. So but suicide is one of those things where we don't understand it as well. And so I think it's just, when we're asking people to do prevention, when the science is really still such early days, when we just really don't have this, wonder it's hard for people, right?
Suicide prevention is the Bigfoot of public health issues. It is unknown. We don't really know what causes it, and we don't really know how to effectively take a picture of it. And then what do we do with it if we find it? We're just not there yet. And so that's terrifying for a lot of people, and especially people in this field to handle. Yeah.
And so then it's the blue whale, or then it's you watch the video that drives you insane, or the LSD falls in the swimming pool, and then you believe your cup of orange juice. It's that's a story people can understand. So that's a story people use. And the thing is, that's a wonderful moment for us to remind people, hey, we need to start funding research so that we do understand this. We need to have conversations with people that could be supportive and life-saving. Here are some things we know that work. Here are some things we need to learn, and here's how we're going to do it. That's a good moment for that. But You know, it's so hard to have a complicated conversation with folks.
I think we
period.
can agree that a better community for suicide prevention focuses on evidence.
Yeah.
So
Where you
perhaps
going with
that's
that?
the place to start, because there's scant evidence for media guidelines. There's scant evidence for a lot of trainings that happen. The way that they're actually administered, not the book version, but the thing that actually happens. There's scant evidence that is actually going to transform your community into a resilient community. I don't think that we don't have widespread evidence of that ever happening, unfortunately. Someday.
What's effective and what's attractive or compelling are often completely different things, right? And it turns out the human behavior is incredibly complicated, and that when we talk about suicide, it's multidimensional. It's got internal factors, it's got external factors, biology's involved, culture's involved, all of these different things. Diet could be involved. Guess what? Inflammation. So we're back to germs. I don't know if you guys saw the recent study just came out that really made a compelling connection between inflammation and depression. So we know that there's all these different things that are connected, but we're looking for easy answers. This is why Prozac, look, in the late 80s when Prozac really hit the scene, right? Prozac use exploded across this country, absolutely exploded. Because, well, hell, here's a simple solution, right? It's clean, it's neat, it's easy. Take a pill, it'll solve your problems. Particularly in this culture, particularly in American culture, we really want quick fixes. We want easy fixes. We want things to be simple and clean. And understanding suicide requires a lot of understanding of the complexity. It's why I'm really critical of safe messaging, because safe messaging tries to make it like this really simple, clear thing about messaging, and that's absolute and utter nonsense. The research doesn't support that in any way, shape, or form. But yet we make it out like this safe messaging is this really clear-cut, easy thing, and it turns into dogma. You run into safe messaging, for lack of a better word, Nazis that are so incredibly gripped by this sense because, oh God, if we could just control the messaging. Even though we know that contagion, exposure, explains a tiny, 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 tiny percentage of the suicide rate. If we could just do this thing, right? When in fact, it doesn't work that way, folks. And I would like to add, I think on this is that our compulsion around the contagion concept makes it more difficult for us to talk about suicide because people are afraid. The byproduct of the social media guidelines is that talking about suicide in the wrong way can make someone kill themselves. So, dear God, let's not talk about it or acknowledge the blue whale game challenges out there because, oh my God, that we don't want to do that because that'll plant the seed. So we have these two opposing things. We know that talking about suicide openly and honestly is probably protective. And we've got this other thing but if you talk about it the wrong way, people die. And that is not true. Right. So we're fighting that battle.
Talked at AAS with some of the founders of the loss survivor movement, and they talk about a time when the authority figures in suicide prevention were very clear that they needed to be super careful who they talked to suicide about because it could kill a bunch of people. It was lethal to have this discussion.
Dangerous words, Tony.
I mentioned
very dangerous.
But do you, like, when you think about sort of pre-germ theory and you think about when there would be these epidemics or these outbreaks and people would do things like put the bed of a person, with the legs of the bed in pans of water so that the infection couldn't travel on the furniture, for example. Like, people were doing the best that they could with science not being advanced enough for, to combat the problem. Right. And so I feel like that's where we are. That's why we have, we have all these legends because
treatment.
What?
For centuries, bleeding was a primary medical treatment. Like that was like people did that. That was frequent. If you were sick, people bled you. The barber doctor would bleed you so that you felt better because blood was infected. It was bad and there was no infection. It was just your bodily humors were out of whack, and so they bleed you and then you get better. Well, that's not true at all. It killed a whole bunch of folks. However, no antibiotics, no germ theory of disease. So this seems an awful lot. You would think that we would have seen the pattern by now. You know, we don't really have a solid theory here. We have a lot of people that are compelled and interested in helping other people, but we don't have a population level solution to this problem.
And I'm like, that's why you have urban legends. I think that's why suicide is scary, because we don't have those kinds of solutions ready to go that have been successful deployed at scale. We just don't. And we need them. And I think like people are telling these spooky stories because in some ways, like that's, you know, people tell spooky stories to cope, right? And I think that's what people are doing, is they're coping with the fact that we do know that in the case of the Blue Whale Challenge, we do know that there are youth out there who are right now feeling like they want to kill themselves. We know that there are youth who are self-harming. We know that that's happening, and we don't know for sure what to do about it at scale. And I think that's why it's easier to talk about the spooky game than it is to, because you know, that's another thing. Like when I was looking at the media on the Blue Whale, there are tons of media events about that and parents warning other parents. And I'm like, but what about the kids who were suicidal that had nothing to do with the Blue Whale game? Like those kids are there. And they were there before that news article were there, and they were there after. And I'm like, where are the parents urging other parents to check in about your kid's mental health? Like, where are those articles, right?
I think that's a really good point. So and I think one of the things that I loved about the AAS media release was that it's an opportunity to have the important conversation about suicide prevention, which is, hey, check in with the people around you. Here's some things that you might want to look out for. See how folks are doing. Have a conversation. Talk about suicide, right? And I think this is the thing that is really key for me. And having read through, I don't know, 250 Reddit suicide responses, right, as part of a project. April, you did the same thing, right? That was an incredible experience. One of the things that was really compelling to me is that you would run into these responses where people would pop in and they would say, I don't know how to explain this, but seeing other people that are experiencing the same thing that I'm experiencing actually made me feel better, right? That in fact, it's helpful for me to see that other people are able to talk about this and share these things. So this thing that you think that when reading 250, seeing all this giant thread of people talking about the agony and their suicide thoughts would somehow be would be damaging, when in fact it's protective. That the fact that people are able to talk about it, that's really interesting to me and compelling to me. We act like suicide is this really rare event. In terms of behavior, in terms of deaths, it's definitely a low base rate event. In terms of behavior, it ramps up. But in terms of thoughts, suicide thoughts are not uncommon at all. They don't meet the definition of an uncommon experience. But you don't know how common it is because we don't talk about it. People don't say, you know, yesterday was a really bad day. I couldn't believe I actually thought about suicide. That happens all the time. I guarantee it's happening right now. I bet there's people that are watching this right now that have had that thought recently, but they didn't tell anybody about it, right? So it feels like this mysterious and hidden and taboo thing, when in fact it's actually thoughts about suicide are not an unnatural experience for human beings in any way, shape, or form. And this is a little nugget from the safe messaging crowd. The most protective type of media out there is media that talks about people who had thoughts about suicide and got through it. And this is what they did. That, of all the media out there that seems to have the most protective influence, people having open conversations about their suicide experience tends to be the most protective media out there. Go figure.
I think, you know, one of the things that was interesting to me was, you know, there was this huge spike in calls to the crisis line following Robin Williams' death. And I think they still have spikes around the anniversary of Robin Williams' death. Mm-hmm. But then one of the second biggest drivers of spikes to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline was Logic's song, like, which is very, very different kind of messaging, right? So there's something about popular messaging that does drive help-seeking behavior. So at the very, very least, it's an opportunity to nudge public health behavior. And, you know, we should be using every one of those opportunities we can get our hands on, because that is something we do know that affects help-seeking, right? Maxwell, you were nodding your head.
Yeah, and even with the research about people searching suicide and suicide prevention after watching 13 Reasons Why, I mean, like it's all kind of tied together. And Julie Searle pointed something out too on the thread, and this is a great point. If you want to have an effective response to some of this stuff, and you need to have an effective response, Make sure you have a good team and that you're passing it by people who are connected and have a goal and a purpose behind any sort of statement that goes out. The people who are on this committee, Desiree Stage, Amelia Leto, Julie Searle,
Des, Amelia, Julie,
John Ackerman. I mean, we're throwing a lot of people into this thing that I don't know that they really know that they're in it. But they know what they're doing and there's a purpose behind it. And so to be able to focus and get something out there really quickly and really helpful is key. So yeah.
We're hitting, I can't believe we made it to final thoughts again. It's one of those deals where it's so hard to explain to everybody how fast this hour flies, but we're heading into final thoughts. I'm going to just do a quick check-in on the Twitter feed before we get to final thoughts. So we've had folks talk about the importance of making sure that we're educating youth about mental health and suicide, and we're giving them an opportunity to talk, that they should have as many opportunities to talk with helpful, supportive adults about suicide as they do to have sort of quiet conversations about hoaxes like the blue whale. We have definitely had folks talk about like using public messaging opportunities, and anytime that there's an urban legend that is in the public awareness and they're talking about suicide, that's a great moment for us to be talking about that. World Suicide Prevention Day is another. We have folks talking about all sorts of old cures, like about leech, bleeding people with leeches, spinning people, mental health asylums, or, insane asylums, really, and spinning people to spin the crazy out of them, and all sorts of things that we've done to heal people that were the best that people knew how to do given the state of the science of the day. This has all been in the feed. We've also had folks sort of check in about the spookiness of urban legends. And so my final thought of the day, looking at all of these, are number one, thanks for showing up and participating. This was a really interesting Twitter feed to read. If you have a chance, hang on to things. AS is going to be really being attentive to these these public conversations and making sure that we don't waste opportunities to talk about suicide prevention, like when the public gives us one. So help us share those messages anytime that you can, because it's a welcome mat. It's an open door for us to share information that might be helpful to someone's public health. Bart, final thoughts.
Final thoughts is that when you see things about suicide that you wonder about their veracity, investigation is good. Checking facts out is good. Using it as an opportunity to engage people in conversations about suicide in areas that we know that's helpful, getting people resources, making sure they know they can talk about it, and checking in on folks are things that are key. Here's something that I want to be careful about. The data shows that if you things that are untrue get repeated, even when we know that they're untrue, if they get repeated enough, we start believing them. And so it is really important that in our messaging that we are being accurate and that we avoid adding more credence to things than they have. So open up a dialogue, make sure we're talking about it, make sure people have access to things that are helpful, and use it as an attempt to engage, I think, is one of the best things that we can do about some of these myths that are out there, right? It gives us a chance to engage and redirect the conversation.
Chris Maxwell, you're nodding, so you go next.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm here. I'm nodding because Bart just basically said everything that I was going to say. So
that happens to all of us.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't know. Did I?
No, you nailed it. You nailed it. Nothing else needs to be said for me.
Give us a final thought about using media effectively.
Right. Again, just make sure that when you are trying to engage other people, that you have a purpose behind it and that you have a clear goal of what you are trying to do, whether it's a statement, whether it's an interview that you're doing with local press, whether it's something that you're putting out on social media. Make sure that you have a goal and that there's a purpose for you to do it.
And finally, Mr. Tony Wood.
My favorite Chief Justice of the United States, Louis Brandeis, said sunshine is the best medicine. He actually said sunshine was the best disinfectant. That's what he actually said, but I like the medicine version better. However, go out there, talk about suicide with somebody that hasn't heard about it, and don't make it weird, okay, guys? Just do that this week. That'd be a good thing for Suicide Prevention Week.
Or do. Let me add to that.
Well,
if you're prone to
make it a little
skin,
weird, but
if you're
don't make
prone to
it
skin cancer, avoid that advice. Avoid that advice. The sunshine is the best medicine. Melanoma kills, Tony. Melanoma kills.
true, but sunscreen.
Sunscreen.
Sunscreen saves. It's another hour. Everybody, this week is National Suicide Prevention Week. Hashtag NSPW. Follow that hashtag, retweet, make content. Look for really great, creative, interesting, and engaging ways to talk about suicide and suicide prevention. We certainly have so much to do in terms of research and public health to change the scope of what's happening. We would love for suicide to become the smallpox of our generation. It's something that happened 2 generations ago that never happens anymore. Let's all work towards that in this week. Here's a little hint. We have some special guests next week from the Jedi Council. We're very, very excited. We're going to be talking about Rick and Morty. So if you were like me, you're going to spend this week figuring out how to watch all the Rick and Morty episodes. So we're going to talk about suicide and mental health themes on Rick and Morty next week. We are keeping it interesting and engaging. While we know many of you are tweeting heavy, thoughtful public health messaging all week, come here to get restored, to get energized, to get engaged, and we will see you next Sunday. Take care.
Rick.
Good night, everybody. Woo!